Hey all, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we'll be talking about implicit flow of token grant. Now, implicit flow is pretty much similar to auth code grant flow. If you have not watched that, I highly encourage you to go back and watch that video because this is something that we will be leveraging a lot in the implicit flow. Now, the flow is pretty much similar in terms of having a user, browser, or a native application, a resource provider, and an identity provider. In the first step, the user is going to send a request to the client requesting access to the resource provider. Now, in the second step, the browser sends a request to the resource provider. Now, the resource provider is going to tell the browser that, hey, go ahead and perform an implicit auth, and this is how you would do an implicit auth. Now, taking those instructions, the browser is going to send request to an endpoint called /authorize along with the response type as ID token and redirect URI to where the response is supposed to be redirected. And the response mode can either be query or form post or fragment. Now, the redirect URI is, although it is very optional, it is highly recommended by Azure Active Directory. Now, once the identity provider receives this request from the user is asked for authentication and consent for requested scopes. So, my bad, there's also a option of, sorry, there is also a parameter called scope, which is added along with the first request that is sent to authorize endpoint. Now, once the user gives consent to this particular authorization or to the authentication request, the flow is again back at the identity provider. Now, based on the way in which the browser has requested, it can either request a redirect URI option or it can be a fragment option. So if redirect URI is selected based on form post or query parameter, it will the token is sent to the resource provider on the redirect URI, either using post parameter or using a query parameter. So, the HTTP post and HTTP query parameter. If a fragment option is selected, then the browser is again assumed to take control of the request, and the token is sent back to the resource, sent back to the browser in the fragment. And in the fragment, the browser is going to take the token and it is going to send it to the resource provider. And the resource provider is going to give whatever access that user has requested or whatever sensitive data that the user has requested, or it might use that access token to make subsequent requests to APIs and get that information and then give it back to the users, etc., etc. The one thing that to be noted here is, although the flow is almost same to the auth code grant flow, it is just that there is only one endpoint which is /authorized and the token is fetched directly from there. This was typically implemented in places where there is no guarantee that the client ID and client secret can be stored directly. If you see here in the auth code grant flow, just the auth code was returned, and there was another request that the resource provider had to make to get the access token. But here the access token is pretty much returned directly in the first place. This is because it was assumed that if you store client secret in a place where, let's say in a mobile application or in a single page application inside JavaScript, it cannot be stored securely. Another difference is that there is no refresh token that is returned. So once the access token expires, the client has to request for another access token. In general, from my research, this flow is generally discouraged for implementation in new age web applications, and it is favored for older applications for compatibility.